Here it is, the throne of power in Sydney's multi-billion-dollar taxi industry. And inside, astride that throne, where he has resided for decades, is 83-year-old Reginald Lionel Kermode, a man who has built an all-powerful empire on the back of the humble taxicab. But he hasn't done it alone. On this merry-go-round, he's had some help along the way. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the beginning of this tale.
This budget continues and expands the measures introduced in the past two budgets to assist handicapped people. An important new measure is a pilot scheme to provide transport in specially modified taxi cabs for those disabled people who are unable to use buses, ferries. The government wishes to express its thanks to the taxi industry.
Neville Wran, the 35th Premier of New South Wales, announcing what sounds like very nice policy in the 1981 budget. But more importantly, Wran's proposal for modified wheelchair taxis would create untold riches for Kermode's companies. It was explained to the government, you see, that it cost thousands of dollars to modify these special taxis, and they made less money than other cabs because passengers took longer to load and unload. So a deal was struck. To offset these costs, Wran was convinced that taxi networks should be allowed to keep scores of special taxi plates that had been previously handed out for free. Kermode's companies would receive more than half the 94 free taxi plates his government issued. So the two men would become close friends. And in November 2000, Wran was appointed a non-executive director of CabCharge with a share package that in 2009 hit $1.6 million. So Kermode's companies got a lot of free plates. Who cares? The government used to give away free plates to diggers as a way to help them back on their feet. But now, taxi plates were becoming a lucrative investment. In 1990, an ordinary taxi plate was worth $150,000, far more than the vehicle to which it was attached. And just 3 years later, a single taxi plate was worth as much as a family home. Suddenly, Sydney's taxi industry was wheeling around on assets that had climbed to a whopping $1 billion, and whoever had the most plates had the most muscle. After defeating a plan by the Liberal Premier Nick Greiner to deregulate the industry and prick the price bubble, Kermode welcomed Labor back to power. The new Transport Minister was Brian Langton, a man who would eventually resign after he was discovered rorting travel expenses. Under his watch, the state government decided to give Sydney's taxi royalty an early Christmas present. And overnight, Reg Kermode's companies became far wealthier. Those free plates that Kermode's companies and the other taxi networks received were never meant to be traded on the open market. In fact, they were meant to expire years earlier. But for some reason, the networks were never forced to give them back. So, just months after being sworn in as a cabinet minister, Langton agreed to allow these free plates to be traded. The effect was instant. The second biggest taxi network in Sydney, run by Kermode's good friend and fellow board member, sent this table to their shareholders. With a stroke of the pen, the government boosted the net assets of the company which owns the Premier and Cumberland taxi networks by 88%. It is a little harder to find details in the financial records published by Kermode's companies in 1996. But according to the price of taxi plates at the time, this was a gift worth as much as $10.8 million, and potentially a similar amount again in revenue. But weren't these plates, and the millions of dollars in revenue they generated, meant to pay for disabled taxi services? They were, but drivers were seeing little of this extra money because they were still reluctant to get behind the wheel of those modified taxis. Despite the millions of dollars in effective subsidies sloshing around the industry, a report by the Equal Opportunity Commission in 2002 found Sydney had the lowest proportion of wheelchair taxis of all cities around the country. It had turned out that many of these specially designed taxis were being kept off the road, which conveniently helped keep the value of taxi plates sky high. Kermode was grateful, and CabCharge showered the New South Wales Labor Party with more than $190,000 in declared political donations since 1999, and he played a role in the Taxi Council pouring a separate $183,000 into the party's coffers. And all was well, until someone let the cat out of the bag. The new Transport Minister, Michael Costa, always wanted to do things differently. So he set up a special inquiry into the taxi industry, and in a bombshell, it released an interim report in September 2004. It couldn't have made the kingpin happy, not least because his companies were sitting on about $11 million worth of those very plates. The inquiry was swiftly shut down, and since then, there's been nothing but deafening silence on the issue. Now this year, the competition watchdog is taking Kermode and his multi-billion-dollar cab charge empire to court over anti-competitive behaviour. So it might be worth pausing for a moment to consider the help Reg Kermode got along the way.